So I've removed the battery, and sometimes when you're in an area that has salt air, these can be kind of frozen. So I'm going to cheat and I'm going to use this machine here. But one trick that my dad taught me was you want to tighten first, believe it or not, to break it loose. Just in case, just tighten a little bit, then easy, and then maybe tighten, loosen, and don't go too fast because you can even break it then. And this is where you want to spray some inside there. But see how rusty that is? But anyway, that's the trick. You can look real close, this says push, but it's a cover for what's underneath this thing. This thing's underneath this rubber thing. And this plugs in over here to some kind of sending unit on the front of the block, right behind this hydraulic line that's on the other side of the exhaust there, catalytic converter. So all these plugs are a little bit different. That one is very different from the rest, but all you do is push. Then you have the other ones that you can figure out. These piled up here. There's the kind that this holds, so you unclip this from this. So there's different types of plugs here, but most of them you use a little screwdriver. Biggest thing I can tell you, the most important thing, is drain your transaxle fluid before you do anything. Because I went to pull the transaxle. I'm an idiot. So luckily I had these pans nearby. Okay, now you're gonna have to take this drive axle, this whole axle here, the CV axle that goes up into there. You pull it out of the transmission, but first you got to take this bolt out. This goes in the bottom down through here. Always put it in the same direction that you take it out. That's some sort of a cam that helps with alignment. That goes in the bottom. So you take that out of there. There's this other one. I like to leave the top one in for last, and then it slides out. And if you have trouble, you can always spin it while you tap on this with a hammer, but make sure you put the nut on the thread so you don't mess up these threads. You spin that with your gun as it comes out. This CV boot, which is housing the axle, you're going to be pulling that out of the transmission. First you got to take it apart here. It wants to come out, but don't rip the boot. See, that's the thing. That's the problem. Be careful. If you rip that boot right there, it's tempting to just pull, but if you rip the boot, you're going to have to buy a whole new axle. So what you do is you go up on the top and pry it in here, and it'll pop out, and it might be helpful with two people. Okay, but don't rip your boot. But as you can see, it easily pried out with a little pry bar, pulled right out. Then I had to shove it back in because I saw all the oil leaking. So now I'm going to pull this transaxle out, and I'm going to stick a screwdriver in that hole to keep everything in line and lined up. So if you look really close inside, you'll see gears and whatnot. So I'm going to stick, not that screwdriver, stick this one in there. And that one fit perfect. You don't want to use wood because it might get jammed in there and you won't be able to pull it out. Okay, but I moved the CV axle over to the right. Hopefully that'll be good enough. What happens though is I tore the little boot, whatever that is, some kind of a ball joint there. So that's a casualty, and it's going to be a pain to replace that, but just letting you know, you might want to be careful there with that. This is the transmission shifting linkage in here, so I took this off. There's a little pin that goes on here, and then there's a little one of these clips slides down in here, and there's another pin for this one. So two cables here for the shift linkage. Don't mess with this after you pull the CV joint. Don't mess with this. And also you got to pull the slave cylinder for the clutch. You got to pull the slave cylinder for the clutch. The slave cylinder pushes on this arm. What I did is I taped up the piston so that the piston doesn't fall out for some reason while we're messing around. But that's where that comes from. And now I think it's time to start pulling some bolts off the transmission. I'm going to take the lower bolts off first. Sure, I'm glad I took this thing to the car wash first. Now for the starter, you're going to need a 14 millimeter. And if you're down there messing around getting that starter off, you're going to want to bring down your 12 millimeter. Bring a 12 millimeter to get the wiring off. And then you're going to want, for your motor mount right here, that round thing, the motor mount, you don't want to take that bolt off right there, but you want to take off those two bolts down there, and that's a 17 millimeter, so you want a 17 millimeter while you're down there. And I would grab a box end wrench to break it, or a ratchet wrench to get the rest of that bolt off for the motor mounts. While you're down getting the starter, don't forget that on the back motor mount bracket, there's not only two inside here, two bolts that are 17 millimeter, but there's a third one hiding for some reason right there. So those Koreans thought they were funny when they did that. Anyway, take that one out first. Okay, so I'm taking the starter out, and it's a little tricky, but basically there's a nut, or a bolt I should say, right there. It's for the top of the starter. So you get an extension in your ratchet. You might need a little or two extensions to get that ratchet in there. And remember, don't move this while your linkage is off. So, I mean, it's not a big deal, but it's right through there for the starter. The other bolt is on the bottom of the starter. Pretty straightforward. You're just gonna have to find it. I replaced the starter not too long ago, a few months ago. Should have done the clutch then. Anyway, I got this swivelly head extension. It's pretty cool. You can see where it's tapered right there. Just makes it so you can get it at different angles while you do this. Yeah, if you're changing the starter, it's probably time to do the clutch. Or if you're doing the clutch, just change the starter. So I had to do the starter at about 150,000 miles. And then I had to do the battery at about 151,000 miles. But you might as well do the starter and the clutch at the same time. You just want to take these two and then slide this whole transaxle back. All the motor mounts are 17 millimeter. And the top bolts that hold the transaxle right here, those are 17 millimeter. You're probably going to want a breaker bar for those. And the one that's here, 17 millimeter. So a lot of 17 millimeter, which makes it handy.
Okay, I think I need to go hit the beach, or maybe I'll climb a tree, but if you want to learn more about changing the clutch on your Hyundai accent, please see part 2 of this series. See you there.